Hey, it's Shana Meyerson with the Yoga of War podcast. I'm here today with sort of an impromptu live, and today I'm sort of going to be going deeper into the conversation that I had with Andrew Fox on our A Paratrooper and a Yogi Walk into a Bar podcast, episode 21, which just posted a couple days ago. When I just said I'm going to go deeper, I'm actually going to take it in a pretty different direction. So I don't know if it's deeper per se. However, there's a lot of confusion about the UN resolution to recognize Palestinian statehood. And I want to go briefly into just the actual resolution, but more than anything, what I'm going to talk about today is how did we get here, because it's very, very important. So again, if you go over to, not now, later, if you go over to my Paratrooper and a Yogi Walk into a Bar podcast with Andrew Fox, you'll see the full discussion about actual ramifications of this UN resolution to recognize a Palestinian state. But in the meantime, I just want to make some clarifications, talk about how we got to this point, and also at the very end, I'll go ahead and take questions or comments, as long as you keep it civil. I always keep it civil on this end. Please note that I'm not going to be reading comments as I speak, because it tends to be distracting, and I'm already the master of tangents and losing my place in what I was talking about, so bear with me. Okay, let's go ahead and get this party started. So for those of you who aren't aware, this week there was what I would qualify as a deeply shameful and disgusting UN General Assembly resolution to recognize Palestinian statehood. The vote was 142 countries for, 10 were against, one of which was Israel, obviously, one of which was America. So besides those two powerhouses, 8 against, plus those two, and 12 abstentions. Now, let me go on record that the problem with having a Palestinian state being recognized right now is not a problem with having a Palestinian state. The problem is that this is a reward for the most atrocious terror that unfolded on October 7th, 2023. And to think that the answer to that massacre would one day be the granting of a statehood, it boggles the mind. It truly does. It really says a lot about the state of Western civilization. Okay, I think I'm back on. I'm not exactly sure, but I hope so. Sorry, technical glitches run rampant here on YouTube. I'm sorry for that glitch and that freeze. Okay, so anyway, I just, in case you didn't hear, so the UN resolution, which was a non-binding resolution, so really it's just theoretical, was 142 nations for the creation of Palestinian state, 10 against. That includes Israel and America, and 8 others, and 12 abstentions. Again, because my camera just froze, and I fear it's going to freeze again, because it usually doesn't just freeze once. Please know that I will be taking questions and comments at the end. Please be sure to keep it civil. I will always keep it civil on my end as well. I do have it set where you have to be a subscriber for 5 minutes to leave a comment, just to sort of try to block out some of the trolls and some of the evil that tends to flood in when I talk. Okay, so we have this UN resolution, non-binding, meaning it doesn't mean anything, it's just theoretical, on the creation of a Palestinian state. Now, as I mentioned before, if you go to my newest episode number 21 of A Paratrooper and a Yogi Walk into a Bar podcast with Andrew Fox, there we get into the full discussion of the ramifications of the actual resolution. But today I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we got here and why you need to care. So what does this mean, this resolution? In essence, nothing. It is a reward for terror, the most horrific terror that's been seen in the Western world in decades. Since, well, I would even say way worse than 9/11, not if I were to compare terror, only because of the very, very personal face-to-face nature of it, that there was nothing anonymous about the attack. But anyway, this resolution ultimately was just the culmination of this vast delegitimization campaign that Hamas, or more broadly, the Muslim Brotherhood, has levied against Israel. This is not a new campaign. This is something that's been going on for decades. It's just that now that we have social media and it's ramped up so much, and we have technology like bots that help to get around like just straightforward social media, let's just say the time was ripe for this campaign to go crazy. If you don't believe that this is all part of a delegitimization campaign, keep in mind that the fact that this whole vote was purely performative proves it. First of all, how do we know it's performative? Because the U.S. is on the Security Council and has the right to veto, and everybody knew that the U.S. was going to veto. And so all this was basically a slap in Israel's face and saying, yeah, you had 1,200 massacres, you had rapes, beheadings, families tied together, burned alive, the most horrific things I could possibly imagine, and some that you can't even imagine. And we think that an appropriate reward for this will be statehood. Just like they did with ISIS, the Islamic State, how they gave them a state after their terror rampage. Of course, I hope you know that I'm being extremely sarcastic. There's no other world that doesn't involve Israel that would reward terror with its own state. But I digress. Remember that this statehood is only theoretical. It doesn't mean anything because of the inevitable U.S. veto. So if you're just saying something just for the sake of telling Israel, guess what? We like them better than we like you. That's pretty much what it comes down to. But here's what people need to understand. And I think that if you haven't followed the Israel, I'll say Palestinian, Israel-Hamas, whatever you want to say, conflict for, decades or longer, that it's hard to understand this concept. But a lot of people think that the delegitimization of Israel was a byproduct of the war. What do I mean by that? Hamas came in, committed these atrocities, live streamed them. There's that. I'm going to get into that. And then Israel struck back, and struck back hard, because that's what Israel does, because it's an existential threat and they have to. And that the way people see it is Israel just went in really hard, and therefore the world is really, really upset that Israel went in so hard, and that's what this is about. This is not what it's about. You have to understand that the delegitimization campaign, which means the campaign to delegitimize the Jewish state, is not a byproduct of the war. It is why the war started. Understand that this whole campaign against Israel, to turn the world against Israel, was in place before 6:29 a.m. on October 7th, 2023. Don't believe me? Why do you think that the protests against Israel, not against Hamas, who committed the massacre, but Israel, started within minutes of the attacks? Why do you think that Students for Justice in Palestine Instagram from Columbia, which has been Columbia University, which has been a hotbed of the anti-Semitism, of the anti-Zionism, and of all this violence and rage against Jews, why do you think they reinstated their Instagram 3 minutes before the attacks when it had been dormant for months? It is not a coincidence. So why is this important? This is important because it was the whole goal of the war from the start, okay? The point, what they're trying to do, and by the way, it cracks me up when people are like, oh, you know, we don't hear Netanyahu talking about a two-state solution. He has in the past. Why would he right now? We're talking about two states, one being a terrorist state that exists exclusively to destroy you, and the other being the democratic state of Israel, which, if you know anything about the history of peace accords, has offered Palestinian state 4 or 5 times, depending on how you look at it. And every time it was not only rejected, but replied to by the Palestinians with increased violence and intifada, okay? So here's the thing, that from the beginning, the Palestinians are like, okay, well, we're going to start this war with the most horrific atrocities, right? And what's going to happen is what has happened every time in the past is that the world is going to get very, very angry when Israel responds. As they say, everyone loves a dead Jew. People can be sympathetic to Israel for the 5 minutes when, you know, or whatever, the day, when they're being attacked and there is no response. But the second Israel responses, the double standards kick in, and all of a sudden the whole world turns on Israel. This is nothing new, and this is why Hamas launched this attack in the first place. They knew full well what Israel's response was going to be to these attacks. They knew that it was going to be completely and utterly overwhelming, okay? But the sad thing is they also knew how the world would respond. Now, let me take a step back for 1 second, because I'm going to tell you Hamas's words. This isn't my opinion. This is Hamas's words, that they say flat out in video after video that every Gazan casualty is a win for them, okay? They love the death of their own people because A, it's a society of martyrdom, and B, they know that every time one of their people is killed, then the world turns on Israel. Again, are you seeing the pattern here yet? And so they, Hamas, hide in the tunnels below the people, and then they take the people above the tunnels and use them as human shields. And each time one of them is killed, Hamas gets the win. Okay, the biggest win, of course, being statehood for this behavior based on the most blatant double standards ever to exist, like as in ever. So here's the thing that I think is excruciating to me personally. And I hope that anybody with a sense of morality would also be equally horrified. But you have to understand that Hamas literally banked on the fact that the social justice warriors of the world were going to defend them even as they live streamed their barbaric terror online. Okay, why? Oh, Jews. It's because it was against the Jews. So that makes it okay. Remember, there used to be a day and age where things like beheading was considered to be bad. Not just bad, but summarily bad, unequivocally bad. But no, we have people now who believe that to behead a Jew, and if I want to give you some slack, I'll say an Israeli, is social justice. There is no world on earth where that is social justice. And there's no world on earth where giving a state to these terrorists is social justice either, especially keeping in mind that the Palestinian state, air quotes, not a state, does not meet any of the qualifications of being an actual state. Among other things, no borders and no government. So they have a flag. I mean, does that count for something? Okay, so here they live streamed this terror. And the funny thing is, like, funny not funny, that's my hashtag, funny not funny, is that people will simultaneously deny that the atrocities ever happened and at the same time defend them for having happened. And by the way, a lot of this defense is like post-factual. So what they're thinking is, oh, well, how can you say that these 1,200 people who were massacred compares to the X number of people who have been killed in Gaza in this war? Okay, I'm going to get into the X number of people in a minute, because that's one of the bitterest pills to swallow. It's such a double standard, but the answer is you can't justify the effect by negating the cause. You can't say that the war is the problem when the war came as the result of the massacre. The massacre is the problem. And by the way, even if you wanted to put the massacre into the annals of history of things that happened way off in the past 2 years ago, there are still 48 hostages being held in brutal captivity in Gaza. So there's that. And so, social justice warriors, I really want to ask you, I'm going to go over just like a very, very few of the atrocities that occurred on 10/7, because honestly, the atrocities repeat. And so it's not worth it to go over 1,200 of them, nor do I have the time or the information. But I want to know if you think that resistance by any means is a real thing and that Hamas are nothing more than social justice warriors. I want to know in what world you would be okay with the following things happening to, let's say, your family. Let's start with the B-Boss family, because I think that most of their story is pretty familiar to people, but not all the way familiar. Oh, and time heals all wounds, doesn't it? So let's talk about it. I hope that you saw the video of Sherry B-Boss, the mom, being herded away by a whole slew of terrorists as she held her two babies, Kfir and Ariel, to her breast with like a blanket, trying to shield them from the terrorists. It's one of the most gut-wrenching, soul-crushing videos to come out of 10/7, because when you watch it and you see these two innocent babies who have no idea what's going on, and the horror in Sherry's face as they're taken away to Gaza, there's so much to this story. Obviously, not obviously, maybe you know that her husband Yarden was also abducted, but he was abducted separately. I'm going to get back to those four, but things that most people don't know, both of Sherry's parents were also massacred that day. Oh, and the family dog, because why not also kill the Jewish dogs? Okay? After all these horrors, when they had the release earlier this year, the first release in Yarden, the father was released. They humiliated and mocked him and asked him on stage how, if he was excited to see his wife and children. Okay? This is a guy that the only thing that has kept him alive is the thought of seeing his wife and children again someday. Now, about a year and a month prior to that, They did actually tell Yarden that his wife and children had been murdered, and they did it on a live stream so that they could show him just utterly destroyed. The psychological trauma is beyond comprehension, and he had to live with that moment alone in the tunnels for the next, 13, 14 months, not knowing, is it true, is it not true? And then when he's released, they tell him that he's going home to his wife and children, okay? If you don't know what happened to Shiri, Kfir, and Ariel, now Kfir was 9 months old when he was abducted. What kind of animals steal a baby? And Ariel was 4. The 3 of them were murdered with the bare hands of their captors, who, by the way, were not Hamas. They were just run-of-the-mill Gazan civilians who wanted to get in on the fun, okay? The innocent people of Gaza have been holding, torturing, and yes, even murdering Israeli hostages. So Shiri and her 2 babies were murdered, strangled, by their captors. And when they were returned, first of all, they locked the coffins. They filled them with propaganda flyers, and then they returned the wrong remains. They didn't even give Shiri's body, which, by the way, Israel had to break the locks. Again, the level of humiliation after this big parade where the crowds are cheering and passing out candy and singing and dancing in celebration of these 3, this woman and her children that have been murdered by the Gazans. The level of sickness is incomprehensible. Israel finally pries open the coffin, does a DNA test. It's not Shiri. They just put in some random person, and then they had to go through the additional trauma of getting her actual remains. And Yarden, the father, has to live with us. Now, if you don't know, Eli Sharabi, the one who, when he was released, was the one that everybody was like, whoa, okay, that looks like a Holocaust victim. He had a very similar story with his family. So I had an episode here with Kochav El-Chaim Levy about kinocide. Okay, it's a term that she and Michael Kotler came up with, about weaponizing the killing of entire families and abuse of entire families, kin, rather than just one-on-one, and it was just a whole level of horrible. Maybe you also saw, the video of a Muslim man who was pulled out of a car. He was on the road and he begged for his life, saying, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Muslim. He's saying it, begging in, excuse me, in Arabic. And on screen, they decided a good idea would be to behead him, live streaming, and he was a Muslim. Now, you might say, oh, okay, well, then it wasn't just about the Jews. Well, you have to understand that according to them, if you live in Israel, you are even worse for having been willing to be a citizen of the Jewish state, keeping in mind that Muslims have equal rights when they are Israeli citizens, okay? So who wouldn't want to, okay? Muslims who are full citizens in Israel have more rights than in any other country in the Arab world. There's that. Then there was a story. I'm just going to give one more so the social justice warriors of the world can cheer and scream for how wonderful it is when Hamas literally murdered a grandmother, maybe a great-grandmother, I don't remember, in her bed on her own Facebook page. And it wasn't just like one shot, which they easily could have done, but it was many shots. Dozens of stabbings. Just horrifying stuff. So I want to know, in what world that doesn't involve Jews, is it okay for the world to condone this kind of barbarism? Okay? I'll give you a minute to think about that. I'll give you 1 second. I hope that you don't need a minute to think about that, because the answer is there is no world in which this is okay, or that people who commit these kinds of atrocities have any right to roam the earth, quite honestly. So let me talk a little bit more about how we got here. And I'm going to start with an analogy that is certain to upset many listeners. But hear me out before getting up in arms about it. So if you look at FBI statistics, okay, because that's the best statistics I could come up with for our nation, the United States of America, on black murderers, people who, black, African American, whatever you want to call it, people who commit murders in America, okay? These people constitute 51.2% of murder arrests in America, okay? And 52.7% of robbery arrests. These are 2024 statistics. Now, keep in mind, they comprise 11.7% of the population. So we're talking about almost 5 times as likely as other segments of the population to commit murder or robbery. Now, this is not racist, and this is not meant to be anything against any group of people. So hear me out. This is not racist. This is just facts. These are statistics. And if you have better statistics or you don't like them, go ahead and show me statistics that are more sound than those of the Federal Bureau of Investigations. And I am happy to entertain them. But that's not really my point. Here's my point. If more than 50% of all of the murders that are going on in America are being perpetrated by black people, and they constitute about 11 or 12% of the population, what if, now I'm not suggesting this, I'm not condoning this, is nothing in 10 billion gazillion years that I would do. But what if people started screaming in the streets, lynch the blacks, lynch the blacks? Now, would you rally behind that? I mean, I know I wouldn't. I assume that anybody with even a modicum of decency would recoil at the very thought. I mean, even if you, like me, have no skin color in the game, I would wholeheartedly speak up against that, fight against that. We all did. I mean, we all saw how the world, not just America, I mean, honestly, the whole world, yes, including Israel, rallied in defense of George Floyd after that incident. Now, we're talking about one person, right, who was killed by a policeman in a police brutality incident, and the whole world rallied in support of, of the black community, right? That's what normal people do. Now, what do you think would happen if, again, instead of saying, yes, we need criminal reform, we need justice, we need all the things, what if instead people started going in massive mobs, hundreds of thousands of people, sometimes at a time, to yell, lynch the blacks? What do you think would happen? Well, first of all, it would never happen. Okay? And it didn't matter if you were black or you were Hispanic or you were Jewish or you were white or you were Muslim or you were anything. Everybody showed up, right? Everybody showed up. Okay? Now let's fast forward, 5 years? No, 3 years to October 7th, 2023. Now, we're not talking about one person who, by the way, George Floyd was a criminal. He wasn't an angel. He wasn't just this hapless victim, okay? There was a reason why the police were on top of him. Was it police brutality? Yes. but he was a criminal. Let's keep that in mind. Now let's compare that to 1,200 civilians. We're talking about grandmas, grandpas, Holocaust survivors, mothers, fathers, children, everybody that you could imagine being massacred, maimed, raped, beheaded, kidnapped, brutalized, terrorized, burned alive. Name the things. And what was the world's response? The world's response was globalize the Intifada. Okay? In other words, kill the Jews. Okay? Which is no different than saying lynch the blacks. However, it's totally okay in this world. So there are sort of two camps. There's the camp that joins in and says, yes, Intifada, 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 revolution. This is such great and exciting and fun stuff. And then there's the people who are like, not my problem. Why should I care about the Jews? I'm not Jewish, right? So the answer is, why should you care about the blacks if you're not black? The answer to that is because we're human. And in theory, social justice warriors, we stand up for all humans and all human dignity. Not just selectively, not just the oppressor or the oppressed, I'll talk about that in a minute, but all human dignity. There is no world in which October 7th should ever be condoned by anybody who cares about anybody. So here's what I'm hoping. I'm honestly hoping that all these people who are raging in the streets against Israel, against Jews, against not understanding the difference between war and terror, for example, I'm hoping that all these people who are calling for Intifada and death to Jews and all the horrible things just don't even realize how much they've become consumed with hate. And by the way, just so you know, any society that becomes consumed with hate winds up consuming itself. Keep that in mind. This is not an isolated incident, and we've seen this over and over throughout history. So right now, here I am, some random Jewish woman in Los Angeles, and all day long I get comments about that I should be killed, that I should go die, that I'm whatever. I don't even want to get into the words because they're so evil and the accusations are so evil, because I have a problem with terror. I actually don't support terror. I don't support it against my people, and I don't support it against any other people. But the fact that people think that some random person in Los Angeles or some Jewish guy who's just walking down the street with his two little girls in Montreal or in Paris or Amsterdam or name the city is worthy of attack because you have a problem with Israel defending itself in a way that any other nation not only would, but has defended itself in, I'd like to say similar circumstances, but the similar circumstances have never existed. Then if you don't understand that that's a problem, now is a good time for a little bit of self-examination. Among other things, even if you have a huge problem with Israel, let's say you have a huge problem with Israel, you don't like the way that this war has gone or how many people have died have been killed by the war in Gaza, to say that Jewish students should not be able to walk through the UCLA campus, or that you should threaten my synagogue on a Saturday because we happen to be Jewish, or that it's fair game and open season on all Jews everywhere on earth because look at social media and then look at real life, and that's exactly what's happening. It's absolutely insidious and evil. And by the way, I am not saying this to distance myself from Israel. I'm not saying this like, if you're angry, be angry at Israel. Don't be angry at me, random Jew in Los Angeles, because the truth is, I am an avowed, unabashed, and unapologetic Zionist, and I always will be. I will always stand up for my people. I will always stand up for the Jewish state. And if you have a problem with that, then I have to assume, because you're so involved with social justice, that you have a problem with anybody who supports their own state and their own people. So, I mean, American patriots, I mean, that must be super evil. I mean, obviously, if they love their legitimate country, then all Americans must be bad, or Brits, or French, or name the country. If you only have one country in the world that you think is illegitimate, and it just so happens to be the Jewish state, sorry folks, you have an anti-Semitism problem. This all goes back to this massive delegitimization campaign where the world has become victim to, I'm going to say the word. Everybody hates the word. They think the word is overused. It's not overused. This is Nazi level propaganda that the world is falling for. The only difference between now and Nazi Germany is that this time it's global. Okay? Now, this is propaganda. Propaganda is when they use words and false narratives in order to manipulate your beliefs. Now, probably the biggest propaganda win of all of this, and where it all emanates from, is this false flag of free speech. Like people saying, oh, calling for death to all Jews. That's not hate speech. That's just free speech. And then the whole world starts debating, is this free speech? Is this not free speech? Listen, it's hate speech. It's incitement to violence. And again, as previously mentioned, it would never be tolerated against any other group on earth. Hard stop. Fill in the blank. If there were hundreds of thousands of people marching all over the world, calling for death to fill in the blank, Hispanics, Asians, blacks, LGBTQ, whites, it doesn't matter. Would anybody tolerate it? The answer is no. And I'm going to tell you why this free speech argument is doubly wrong and doubly false and doubly illegitimate. And that's not just because this isn't a free speech issue, but it's also because I already forgot what I was going to say. Remember how I said that I always lose my train of thought? Okay, I'm going to have to come back to that. I'm going to stop there. But this is a false flag, and people have got to stop validating the argument that hate speech, oh, I know the other thing, is because they say that it's free speech, but at the same time, they will not let the other side speak. So if you go to any campus and there's a pro-Israel, or even in many cases, just a Jewish speaker, the protesters come, they shout them down, they do not let them speak. There is nothing there about free speech. They don't want free speech. What they want is a free ticket to say whatever the hell they want to say against Jews, and then be like, hey, I'm just an innocent person who's angry about Gaza. BS. This is a family show, so I'm going to try to keep the cussing out of it. But you have to understand that this delegitimization campaign, which again was the whole point of the war, it is not a byproduct of the war. It's why the war exists. And if you don't believe me, look what happened during the ceasefire earlier this year. Did the Jew hatred suddenly stop because the Israel stopped fighting and stepped back in terms that were very, very unfavorable to them in order to get some hostages back, many of them dead and murdered? No. The anti-Jewish rage only ratcheted up. And just you wait, when this war ends, This campaign is not going anywhere. This is a Muslim Brotherhood campaign to create a new Nazi-style mindset, not just in Germany, not just in Europe, but in the whole world. And it's working. Why? Because we have the force multiplier of social media. Hooray for social media. The purveyors of truth and honesty and facts, and completely rewriting history whenever it's convenient. In fact, go online, Google the atrocities of 10/7. You're going to find that almost all of them have been erased from the search engines. There's a new report out today that says that Al Jazeera is the #1 source for all of the major AI programs. Go figure. And that's why whenever you type in anything and try to find any kind of information that, God forbid, is pro-Israel or anti-Hamas, you're going to find some whitewashed version about allegations. It is surreal. So we have social media, which also has these bot farms. There's a video circulating right now that you could see where they have these bot farms where they push out millions and millions and millions of comments on anything that they know is pro-Israel, and they just flood it with like the most horrific anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist vitriol in order to brainwash people, which is working like a charm. And you have to understand, social media actually has two force multipliers. One is the sheer volume of content. Israel doesn't use bots, but they probably should. But the people who are against the Jews, bot, okay? So your whole your whole feed is going to be flooded with anti-Semitic vitriol, okay? But here's the second force multiplier of social media. And in the olden days where I'm from, we called it peer pressure. There is a absolute desperation in this world to virtue signal and to fit in. So if it becomes trendy to want to kill Jews, again, stop and think about that sentence. When it becomes trendy to call for the death of Jews, and if you don't think that that is Nazi-level propaganda, say it over and over in your head until you understand that it absolutely is. But these people are so desperate. Everything about social media, it's peer pressure on steroids. I want to be with the cool kids, so I'm going to wear a keffiyeh. I'm going to call for death to Jews. I'm going to call for river to the sea and intifada and all the things. And if you don't believe that, then try to explain to me how Greta Thunberg, the climate activist, is suddenly so up in arms against the Jews. Now, she said it flat out on multiple occasions, not Israel, the Jews. But let's pretend, because we live in a world of make-believe anyway, let's pretend that dear little Greta Thunberg is only upset about Israel, okay, and the war in Gaza, okay? So she hates Israel. If she were an actual climate activist, don't you think that she would like pay attention to the fact that like there's hardly a more climate and environmentally aware nation on earth than Israel? Their water tech, agricultural tech, climate tech is among, if not the best in the world, where in Gaza, they pump sewage into streets, and they burn tires. Like there's nothing there's no climate activism in Gaza. So if your whole thing, how dare you If your whole thing is climate activism, but all of a sudden, nope, it's the Jews, then that's how we know that this is just a pathetic publicity stunt by a child who was famous. She had her 15 minutes of fame in the UN, and she wants that back. So what better way than, let's rewind, than to get in on the trend of hating Jews, okay? Now, social justice warriors, let's have a sit down. Let's talk again about if you really think that this is all about Israel and that Israel should lay down its arms and Israel needs to have a ceasefire like the wonderful United Nations does. God, doesn't the United Nations seem like such a great organization? Like what a hallowed institution. Never mind that something like 74% of the United Nations now is either run by terrorists or dictators. There's that, but let's put that aside. Don't you love the United Nations, the purveyors of truth and morality in the world, who have more resolutions against the Jewish state, a democratic state, than every other nation combined? No prejudice there, no Jew hatred there. Let's just talk about ceasefire now. So you think that Israel should cease fire. So let me just ask you this. Do you realize that Hamas still has 48 hostages? And if they did what normal, whatever, right? They're not an army, but whatever, military bodies, I don't even know how to refer to them, do in a time of war, that when you lose, you do what's called surrendering, and that ends the war. So if Hamas cared about their people, and I assume a lot of you are joining late, so you missed the part about Hamas does not care about the civilians of Gaza, okay? They use them as human shields and sacrifices, and they say it out loud that every time that one of their people is killed, it increases the hatred of Israel. So it's a win-win for them. They get all the martyrs and they get to stay safe because they're in the tunnels beneath their citizenry who are up on top taking in the brunt of the war. But they also get the win that the world is like, look how bad Israel is. Israel is targeting mosques and hospitals and schools. Oh, because Hamas is using those places as military bases and therefore they're legitimate military targets. But never mind that. Okay, let's just never mind all of that. Let's just pretend this is a war, like a normal war. It isn't. Let's pretend this is a normal war and Hamas actually cared about the citizens of Gaza. Wouldn't they surrender? Wouldn't they just give back the 48 hostages that they are torturing and keeping in the most horrific conditions? You've seen the videos. I am sure you've seen the videos. All they have to do is turn in those hostages and surrender. And the war is over. Now, that's what a normal governing force that cared about its own populace would do. But no, the world wants Israel to capitulate. Why should Israel care more about the people of Gaza than the government of Gaza? And by the way, side note, Israel does care more about the people of Gaza than Hamas, the government of Gaza. How can I say that? How do I know that? Because even as Hamas is throwing their people in front, deliberately in front of the Israeli offensive and using them, once again, as human shields and sacrifices, Israel has gone to lengths that no other country in the history of warfare has ever gone to try to protect the people of Gaza and get them out of the way of danger. This is well documented, and you can listen to experts like John Spencer, who's been on my show twice, Andrew Fox, who's been on my show twice, and also we have the A Paratrooper and a Yogi Walk Into a Bar podcast if you want to see more casual conversation about these topics, and Richard Kemp, who's actually been talking about this since at least since 2014 that I could think of, but I'm going to guess probably earlier than that. These are all people who have zero skin in the game, who have attested to the extraordinary lengths that Israel has gone to protect the people of Gaza. Okay, I can't even, it's so hard to even begin with the false narrative. So I'm not even going to get into the genocide claims here today, because there is no genocide. Even the people who are claiming there's genocide literally made up their own definitions of genocide because it didn't qualify, because genocide implies intent, and the fact that Israel has gone to extraordinary lengths to, again, protect the people of Gaza, get them out of harm's way, and also, if 85% of Gaza is destroyed, but only something like 3% of the people, even as they're being used as human shields, have been killed in this fighting, then if Israel wanted to commit a genocide, wouldn't it be closer to 85% instead of a tiny, tiny little fraction? Answer, yes. You don't have to be a math expert to understand that concept. Or maybe you do. Or maybe you just have to not be anti-Semitic. It's hard to really draw the lines these days between people who can't do math and people who just hate Jews. Now, let's put this also into another context, because this is the one that I find the most interesting. And I'm going to compare this to the Allies' war on terror, right? The 20-year war that followed 9/11, okay? Keep in mind, in approximately a week and a half, we're going to be in year 2 of this war, okay? So we're talking about a 20-year war, 20 years, okay? The same people, the Brits and the French and all the people and the Australians who right now want to grant the terrorists their own state as a reward for terror and tell Israel that they need to back off and they're fighting too hard and all the things, the same people not only engaged in a 20-year war on the perpetrators of 9/11, but wait for it, if you use the same metric, I'm going to say same, they're actually tamer metrics. I'm going to explain why. But for right now, for argument's sake, I'm going to say the same metrics that Hamas Ministry of Health, okay, the Gaza Ministry of Health, by the way, if you don't know, is Hamas. So if you believe what they're saying, again, propaganda. Okay, so they're claiming there's something in the vicinity of, I think right now it's somewhere in the vicinity of 65,000 deaths, okay? Now, according to these parameters, okay, this means not just people who were killed in the actual fighting, like say if a bomb hit your house or whatever, but also sort of side effects of war, which would be things like food insecurity, malnutrition, possible like lack of medical care, all the things that happen in every war ever, okay? How many deaths do you think, according to those figures, do you think that the Allies created in the Middle East on the war of terror? So if anybody wants to type in a guess, feel free. I'll give you a hint. It's more than 65,000, but keep in mind also it was a 20-year war. So I'll go ahead and give that slack or whatever. And if nobody has an answer, I'm going to go ahead and tell you. Make sure to hold on to your hats and glasses, kids, because if you use that metric, there were 4.5 million civilians killed in the Allied war on terror. 4.5 million, okay? Now, if you only want to look at the people who were killed, like literally by the war itself and not by side effects, the only statistic I've been able to find was somewhere in the vicinity of 440,000. So where were the people who were raging in the streets, calling for death to America and its allies for fighting that war on terror after 9/11? Where were they? Right. Nowhere. They didn't exist. We know that war on terror is a good thing, that in this world, not all value systems are created equal. In this world, there actually is good and evil. What happened on 10/7 was pure evil, pure unadulterated evil. What Israel is doing now, which is fighting what was a defensive war and now is just the existential war to fight the last battle in Gaza. This is the goal. This is going to be the war to end all wars. But when Jews defend themselves, this is the problem, right? Now, I want to talk about a few things more about these statistics because everybody is so caught up in the statistics and they are so misleading. First of all, just know, again, don't take my word for it. Ask any military expert on earth. There is no such thing as real-time war statistics, okay? There's no such thing as a bomb landing and then saying, whatever, 563 people died. It doesn't exist unless the terrorist propagandists of Hamas also happen to be the most brilliant statisticians, and that they have discovered some method of statistical accounting that no other nation in the history of warfare ever has. Okay? So that's your first clue that everything that comes out of their mouth is complete BS. Here are some other clues. Remember how I told you how the way that they account isn't exactly the same as what I just mentioned on the war on terror, meaning byproducts such as malnutrition, hunger, lack of access to medical, etc. Do you know that I keep wanting to call them the Hamas Ministry of Health, but I'll go ahead and use their real term. The Gazan Ministry of Health, when they give the number of people who have died in the war, okay, what they are literally accounting for, never mind that they're making up numbers, there's that too, but what they are literally accounting for is people who have died in the war. So that includes people who die of old age, people who die of cancer, people who die in car accidents, people who die by misfired Hamas or PIJ rockets. Those are also Israel's fault, by the way. People who die when Hamas kills them in the streets, as perhaps you saw this last weekend when they killed 3 people in the streets for theoretically collaborating with Israel, no proof necessary, and then just left their bodies in the town square for everybody to look at. Yeah, no, those are also counted in these statistics. So there is no comparison, but 65,000 in 2 years versus 4.5 million in 20, do the math. And then ask why people only care, this complete double standard when Israel is involved. And this comes back to, and I said in the beginning that I was going to talk about this, and guys, if you have any questions or civil comments, I'm going to be taking questions and civil comments shortly, and I will address them. Feel free to start thinking about them, and then if there's anything in the chat that's worth discussing, I'm happy to discuss them. But one thing that you have to understand, I'm sure you've heard about it, is this oppressor-oppressed paradigm. This is a big part of the delegitimization campaign, which is to say that everybody in the world, yes, you too, is either an oppressor or the oppressed. You can't be both, okay? So why, after 1,200 Israelis are massacred on October 7th, are the Israelis branded as the oppressor instead of the oppressed. In any other world, the victim would be considered the oppressed. Not in this world. Not in this world. We don't live in a world that cares about, facts. Okay, so there's a couple reasons. The first one is the misconception that Jews are white. More than 50% of all Jews in Israel are people of color. So there's that, but I'm going to go ahead and argue that being white is not a crime anyway. Caucasian, whatever you want to call it. So that is another layer of double standard BS. But here's why the oppressed class, or the people the social justice warriors who are all into defending the oppressed, the reason why they hate the Jews so much is because if you look at historical facts and evidence, there is no people on earth ever who has been as oppressed throughout the entire history of their existence as the Jewish people. That's the first thing. People hate that the Jews have legitimate claims to oppression and victimhood. But here's where things turn. In today's victim mentality, it's a race to the bottom. Everybody wants to be the most oppressed. That's how you win today. Yeah, not the Jews. The Jews have never wallowed in our violent oppression or victimization, and it has been a history of the most violent oppression imaginable, okay? Instead of wallowing in the ashes, which is what the victim class does, what we did was we rose far, far above the ashes. And the resentment is insane. Who thought that after 1,200 people were massacred, that instead of the Israelis being defeated, they're like, we're going to go out there and we are going to win this war. We rise from the ashes. People accuse the Jews of controlling the world, right? We control Hollywood. We don't control Hollywood. I think that the spectacle at the Emmys a couple weeks ago pretty much proves that. But we did create Hollywood. Why? Because the Jews have always used music and comedy to uplift the spirits in, yes, the face of violence and oppression against us. And yes, real, actual genocides. If you want to know what genocide actually is, look at the Holocaust, look at the pogroms, look at the history of the Jewish people from time immemorial. So yes, we created Hollywood to deal with the pain. We have a lot of lawyers. Why? Because we needed to defend ourselves from a lot of false accusations and libels that we see all the way to today. Why are so many Jews in banking? Well, when nobody will lend you money because you're a Jew, perhaps you need to create your own banks. And by the way, I think that it was, if I'm not mistaken, in Nazi Germany is one of the few jobs that Jews were still allowed to do. Okay? Why are we doctors? Besides the fact that healing the world is a big part of Judaism, who else is going to take care of us? Have you been paying attention, by the way, to social media and the number of doctors and nurses who have no problem going right on social media and saying that they would kill Jewish patients if they were to show up at their clinics? So anytime that you think that you are on the side of goodness and morality and justice, try to step back for a moment. Take out the word Jews. Put in any other group on earth. Say the sentence again. If it doesn't sit well with you, that's called anti-Semitism. And now is your wake-up call. It's a really, really good time to get past that. Now, before I get to any comments or questions, if there are any, I do want to say that tomorrow I have a live conversation at 7 a.m. Los Angeles, 10 a.m. Eastern, with Tinashe Peter. You might, some people know him as Aquarius Wave. He changed his name recently back to his original name, and it's going to be a very interesting conversation about intersectionality and the Black Jewish Alliance. So please do tune in. And so Eva, I don't know if it's Eva or Ava. I touch a Substack all the time, but I don't know how you pronounce your name. Her question is, what about all the posters of hostages that were turned down? I mean, again, like that is another perfect example. People don't even tear down posters of lost dogs. But this was part of the dehumanization and delegitimization campaign because, first of all, we can't allow Jews to be the victims. Second of all, we can't admit, they, the people who are tearing down the posters cannot admit that it was their people that have committed these horrific atrocities. So if you rip down the poster, well, then it never happened, right? Never mind that Kfir Bibas at 9 months old is rotting in a tunnel and then was killed by somebody's bare hands. As long as I rip down the poster, or even better, draw a swastika on his forehead, then I prove that I am on the right side of history, right? So where is the double standard there? Like, I just don't understand. I understand how far-right extremists who literally define themselves by their hatred of Jews or anybody who is not them, can take pride in that kind of behavior. But how does somebody who claims to be acting in the name of social justice possibly do something like rip down a hostage poster, not just of a baby, not even just of women or elderly or anything, but a poster of any human being, including young men? If that were your son, your father, your cousin, your best friend, what would you expect your country to do about that? If 49 of them were being held hostage, what do you think your country would do? And would you condone it under any circumstances? Would you condone taking, like, Ziv and Gali Berman, twins? Could you imagine being a mother with 2 children being held in Gaza captivity? Or Ariel and David Cuneo, again, 2 brothers? Or what they did with Eitan and Yair Horn, sending Yair home but keeping Eitan there? There is no excuse and there is no level of morality. This is pure immorality, and anybody who supports anything that Hamas is doing. And by the way, if you're anti-Israel, you are pro-Hamas. There's 2 sides in this war. Pick your side and then live with that. Because I don't know how people are even sleeping at night living with the decisions that they're making. If there's no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up for the night. I hope that I'll see you tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern, for my conversation with Tinashe Peter. You could look him up here on YouTube or on social media. He's really brilliant, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. So for those of you who tuned in, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for not leaving any hateful messages. That really makes my job a lot easier. And just know that I always reply to all comments as long as they're respectful. So feel free after I'm done with this live to leave any sort of comments. Please like, comment, subscribe, do the things, the more that people share, the more people see. So on that note, for those of you who are Jewish, we're in the middle of the days of awe, not even in the middle. Today was the second day of Rosh Hashanah, one of the holiest days of the year. So Lashana Tova, these are days of reflection and of repentance. These are also the days where the gates of heaven, however you want to define that, are open the most to our prayers. So please continue to pray. Pray for the hostages, all 48 hostages home. When that happens, the end of the war will be nearby, but we have got to get these humans home. And more than anything, please remember to always stay human. Lashana Tova. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow.